Seed oils are having a moment, and not in a good way. From TikToks to wellness podcasts, patients are continually worried that seed oils are pro-inflammatory or behind everything from ADHD to obesity. But what's fact and what's fear? And more importantly, how should you respond when your patient brings it up? I'm Colleen, a PA, dietitian, and your nutrition mentor. Welcome to the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast, your guide to giving better nutrition advice. In today's episode, we're diving into the most common claims about seed oils, providing you with science-backed information so that you can confidently discuss this with your patients. I'm really excited to have this conversation with my guest, Charlotte Martin. She's a registered dietitian and spokesperson for Soy Connection. And this episode is sponsored by Soy Connection, so thanks to them for all of the fantastic resources that you'll find down below in the show notes. Charlotte is going to help us clarify what seed oils are, how they're processed, and what the research actually shows. We're going to unpack questions like, are seed oils really pro-inflammatory? What is the role of arachidonic acid? What about the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio? Does this matter? Exactly what highly processed means, and if we should be concerned about hexane, and if seed oils are unstable or even unhealthy to cook with. So if you've ever felt unsure how to respond to these concerns, or maybe you just want clear language to use with your patients, you're going to love this episode. So grab your coffee, get comfy, and enjoy my conversation with Charlotte. Charlotte, I am so excited to get into this topic. My audience has been asking for me to cover this on the podcast for a very long time. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today to dive into seed oils with you.
Before we get into the claims, though, I want to start with the basics because my audience knows that I am a huge fan of definitions. So I want to unpack, first of all, what exactly is a seed oil? Because there is a lot of chatter about them, but I think we really need to understand and be able to explain to our patients, what are they?
Yeah. So this is a great question. So seed oils are actually a type of vegetable oil, but what makes them different is that they're made from the seeds of plants, hence the name, and not the fruit of plants. So they include oils like canola, corn, sesame, and soybean oils, and then ones people may be less familiar with, like cottonseed, grapeseed, rice bran, and safflower oils. Now, they each have a slightly different nutrient profile, but overall, they tend to be high in unsaturated fats. Now, these are the fats we generally want more of in our diets, and low in those saturated fats, which are the fats we want less of. So, despite all the noise online, at their core, seed oils are just one type of plant-based oil with a fatty acid profile that can actually support our health.
I'm glad that you gave us those examples because I've often heard from patients that they didn't see the label say seed oil in the grocery store. So it's really important that you explain, you give examples to the patients. So now that we've got a good understanding of exactly what seed oils are, let's jump into some of the common health and nutrition claims we've all heard because it's all over social media and there's a lot of misunderstandings about them. And I really want to get your take on some of these nutrition claims. So the first claim that I hear a lot is that seed oils are highly processed. So can you walk us through what that actually means and what is processing in this context? And then does it affect the oil's nutrient content or maybe its chemical makeup?
Yeah, so when people say seed oils are highly processed, what they're usually referring to are the steps used to extract and refine the oil from that seed. So that includes things like solvent extraction, which often uses a chemical called hexane, and deodorization. Now, I get that words like hexane can sound a little scary, but this is one of those cases where the science is really clear. A peer-reviewed study in Nutrition Today actually looked at this, and it showed that hexane is very efficiently removed during that heating process. And so the amount left in the final oil is way below those established safety limits. And you'd actually have to consume over 100 times more oil than the average person eats in a day to even get close to those limits. Plus, after that deodorization step, it just helps remove all flavors and any leftover impurities, the oil still keeps some beneficial nutrients like vitamin E. And vitamin E is an antioxidant that supports immune function, brain health, skin protection, and more. So, yes, seed oils are processed, but that's not inherently bad. And the bigger question we really want to focus on here is how they impact our health. And the evidence overwhelmingly shows that including seed oils in the diet can be beneficial to our health. And I just want to solidify this for everyone. The word processed or processing definitely has that negative connotation, but processed is not synonymous with unhealthy. And there are many food processing techniques beyond what we just even went over for seed oils that not only help preserve the nutritional quality of foods, but can even make them more nutritious and less harmful, etc. So, again, no need to fear or assume the worst every time you hear the word processed.
Yeah, I'm so glad you touched on that and lingered there because it is often thought that processing equals bad, but there is a lot more nuance to that. We can't just make that claim. So that's going to bring us to a related claim, which is that seed oils are pro inflammatory. And this is usually coming down to when people look at the omega 6s and the omega 6 fat that seed oils contain. So if you can unpack that claim a little bit for us so we can understand that better.
Yes, absolutely. This is one of the most common claims I hear. So I'm going to break it down because it can get a little confusing. So, seed oils contain omega 6 fats, specifically linoleic acid, which is actually an essential fatty acid. That word essential means that our bodies can't make it. So, we actually have to get it through food. And the same goes for alpha linolenic acid, which is an omega 3. Now, this idea that omega 6s like linoleic acid are pro inflammatory comes from the fact that in our bodies, this linoleic acid can convert into something called arachidonic acid, which is a metabolite that plays a role in inflammation. But here's the thing. So research shows that only a tiny amount, tiny amount, I'm talking like 0.2% of the linoleic acid we eat actually gets converted into arachidonic acid. And even though arachidonic acid is associated with inflammation, it's definitely not some villain because it also plays a key role in how our cells function, especially in the brain, muscles, and liver, since it's found in the phospholipids there. And it's involved in normal immune responses and other important processes. So, what's really important to know here is that one, it's well established that linoleic acid has a negligible impact on blood and tissue levels of arachidonic acid. And these are kept at a pretty constant level in the body, even with large increases in linoleic acid in the diet. And two, studies consistently show that linoleic acid intake does not raise levels of inflammation in the body. Actually, some research suggests it might actually help lower inflammation and improve overall health outcomes. So, again, this idea that seed oils are inherently inflammatory, that is just not backed by the evidence.
Yeah, and we really do have to look at the bigger dietary picture. We can't just zoom in on one ingredient or one nutrient. So I want to linger here, but divert a little bit to something that's common that we see on social media. And it's a really popular argument for individuals who follow a paleo diet or sort of that ancestral diet. And they claim that that diet, the ancestral diet, didn't include seed oils. And so we, in current day, shouldn't consume them. So what's your take and how should we address this claim?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because this is one that definitely comes up in a lot of the paleo and even now the carnivore circles. The idea is that because our ancestors didn't use seed oils, that we shouldn't either. But here's the thing. Our dietary needs today are very different from theirs. We're living longer, dealing with different health challenges, and facing totally different lifestyles and environments. Plus, our understanding of nutrition has come a long way, and our ancestors definitely didn't have access to the kind of science backed dietary research we rely on today. Like now, we have evidence that incorporating healthful oils like soybean oil into the diet can provide essential nutrients and support overall well being. So, nutrition isn't about copying the past, it's about applying what we know now to make healthier choices in the present. And again, the research that we have today really backs that up. So there have been multiple large meta analyses, including ones from respected sources like the British Journal of Nutrition and Cambridge University, that have shown that higher intake of linoleic acid, and as a reminder, that's that main omega-6 in seed oils, is linked to a reduced risk of heart disease and cardiovascular mortality. One analysis even found a 15% lower risk of heart disease and a 21% lower risk of heart disease mortality with higher linoleic acid intake. And clinical trials also show that when you replace saturated fats in the diet with those polyunsaturated fats, like the ones in seed oils, it helps lower cholesterol and reduce the risk of heart disease. And, it's not just about heart health either. The American Heart Association says linoleic acid may also lower the risk of type 2 diabetes, liver disease, and even dementia. And I really have to mention the study that was published just a few months ago that's made quite a few headlines. It followed over 200,000 people for more than 30 years and found that those with the highest intake of plant-based oils compared to the lowest intake had a 16% lower risk of premature death, which is huge. And, there have been other large-scale studies that have found that higher levels of linoleic acid in the blood or fat tissue were associated with lower risk of major heart events and death from cardiovascular disease. So, yeah, this is one of those cases where modern problems simply need modern solutions, and seed oils, despite the myths, can absolutely be part of a health-supporting diet.
Okay, I have to restate what you just said because I think that is so impactful and it's a lens that we should carry with us when we're looking at current nutrition science. And you had said that modern nutrition isn't about copying the past, it's about applying what we know now to live healthier today. And I think that we need to put that on our mirrors in the bathroom, in our offices, because that is so, so important. We can't just rely on things in the past. We really do need to advance with the changing evidence. So I love that. I love that statement so much. Okay, so we're, moving along. I want to move on to the next claim, and we're still sticking with omega-6s, but it's the claim about that ratio, the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. And some say that seed oils throw off that ratio, which is going to contribute to poor health. So can you help clarify how important is that ratio and how do we address this with patients?
Yeah, I mean, this is one I really love to talk about because it comes up so much. I see it almost daily on social media. This idea that seed oils somehow are throwing off the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio and contributing to poor health. It sounds very convincing at first, but it really doesn't hold up when you actually dig into the science. So, some people like to point to the fact that today's estimated dietary ratio is around 10 to 1. I've also seen people say 16 to 1 or even higher. And this is compared to a presumed ancestral ratio of like 1 to 1 or 2 to 1. And this has led to this narrative that a higher ratio is driving chronic diseases like heart disease and obesity because we've seen an increase in these at the same time. But the real question is, what's actually contributing to that imbalance? I mean, when you really think about it and use some critical thinking here, most Americans aren't getting seed oils from cooking up nutrient dense meals like, roasted veggies or grilled chicken and some soybean oil. They're getting them from really fried foods, packaged snacks, fast food, etc. These foods also tend to be high in added sugars, saturated fats, and calories, and then low in things like fiber, which fills you up, and micronutrients. So, yes, these foods may raise our omega-6 intake, but they're also markers of an overall poor dietary pattern. And that's probably what's more likely contributing to these chronic disease issues. And here is something else to think about. Is the problem really too much omega-6s in the diet, or are we just not getting enough omega-3s? So, I always like to recommend that instead of focusing so much on cutting those omega-6s, which are, as we discussed before, essential fats in the diet, meaning we have to eat them because our bodies can't produce them, we should really be focusing on increasing omega-3s in the diet. And that's through foods like fatty fish, walnuts, flax seeds, and even soybean oil, actually, which contains both omega-6s and omega-3 fats. A lot of people don't know that. Plus, this whole idea of using the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio as a marker of inflammation, it's actually been challenged a lot recently by experts, and for good reason. It's really difficult to accurately define and measure that ratio. And the assumptions it's based on, like omega-6 is being inherently pro-inflammatory, as we now know, just aren't supported by the evidence, which again shows that increasing linoleic acid intake does not raise markers of inflammation in the body.
I'm really glad you mentioned that we're not talking about the seed oils that are found in ultra processed foods. We're talking about the pure soybean oil, canola oil, those types of things that you can be cooking healthful foods with. When dietitians for years have been recommending to avoid, junk food or processed foods and to focus more on whole foods like fruits, vegetables, fish, nuts. And those are the types of omega 3s and omega 6s that we want to be rich in our diet and have a wide variety of. So I think that's a really important point, is to discuss where and what source those seed oils are actually coming from and look at the patient's diet in total, not just really focusing on and harping on one ingredient in and of itself.
Yeah, those seed oils tend to be guilty by association because they're found in so many of these, fried foods at restaurants and packaged snack products that are, not very nutrient dense. And so they get a bad rap for that.
Yep, I agree. Okay, let's shift into processing and stability, because this is where there's a lot of confusion and a lot of concerns. People have brought up that when cooking with seed oils, it can produce harmful oxidation products. And the claim is that seed oils are unstable and they can oxidize easily. So, what is exactly going on here?
Yeah, another great claim to address because this one comes up all the time as well. People hear that seed oils oxidize easily, especially when heated, and assume that that must mean they're dangerous. So we definitely need to unpack that a bit. It is true that linoleic acid, which again is that main fat found in many seed oils, is a polyunsaturated fat. And so chemically, that means it has more double bonds, which can make it more prone to oxidation than saturated fats. But that doesn't automatically translate to harm in the body. And so what's really interesting is we actually have several systems in place in our bodies to neutralize oxidative stress. And randomized controlled trials have consistently shown that eating linoleic acid doesn't significantly impact oxidative stress markers in the body. So even though these fats can oxidize more easily in a lab setting, when we eat them as part of a typical diet, they don't increase oxidative stress in the body. And all that said, proper storage of these seed oils does make a difference here. So, to help preserve freshness and reduce oxidation, you want to keep those oils in a cool, dark place. You want to seal them tightly. And ideally, it's best to use them within about 3 to 5 months after opening. And so, if you leave the bottle out by the stove or near a sunny window, those are the kinds of things that can speed up breakdown. Now, when it comes to cooking, most refined seed oils are totally fine for medium heat methods like sauteing or baking. Some versions, like high oleic varieties, are even more stable and can handle higher heat. The bigger concern here is really when oils are reused over and over again at high temperatures, like in a lot of restaurant fryers, fast food restaurants. And that's where more harmful byproducts can start to form. But occasional reuse, if the oil hasn't broken down from other ingredients, is generally safe. So, yes, seed oils are more prone to oxidation than saturated fats chemically, but that does not mean they're harmful in practice. And when you use them and store them properly, they're stable, safe, and can offer health benefits, especially, and I love to just keep repeating this, especially when they replace those saturated fats in the diet.
Yeah, that last statement is key right there. And that is proven and supported over and over again in the literature. Okay, so another very common one talking about stability and processing is, I see this all the time on social media, is that seed oils are just industrial byproducts that were never meant for human consumption. And where does this come from, and how can we help our patients understand this claim?
Yeah, so I've definitely heard this one too. This idea that seed oils are just industrial byproducts that are not meant for us to consume. It has really taken off online. And I think part of why it has really stuck around is because it just sounds alarming. And What people usually mean when they say that is that oils like soybean or cottonseed oil were originally secondary products of other industries. So, this is like using leftover cotton seeds from cotton fiber production, or soybeans processed mostly for animal feed to then make oils. And yes, large scale production became possible through industrial techniques like solvent extraction and refining. But here's the thing, just because a food or ingredient has industrial roots doesn't mean it's unsafe or wasn't intended for us to consume. And we can technically say the same thing about whey protein if you think about it. It started as a byproduct of cheese making and is now widely used in health products. But funny enough, we don't really hear about that one on social media. So, again, what matters isn't how something started, it's what we know about it today. And seed oils like soybean, canola, corn oil have been part of our food supply for decades. They've been thoroughly studied, and I know I'm belaboring the point here, but the science consistently shows that they provide essential nutrients and can benefit health, especially when they're used in place of those saturated fats. So, we should really be basing our nutrition choices today on what the research actually tells us, not on these fear-driven narratives about how food was first produced.
Yeah, and that's why this conversation is really important, to really look at the science and understand how seed oils are impacted in our body, not just what's happening on the outside. And so I want to round out our discussion and really hone in on the concerns that patients have about the skepticism that seed oil should be classified as unhealthy and that they shouldn't be integrated in our diet. So do you think any of these health concerns about seed oils are warranted?
Yeah, this is such a great question and a very important one because I do think a lot of the concern around seed oils is less about the oils themselves and more about the bigger picture. And first off, the major health organizations, so I'm talking Dietary Guidelines for Americans, World Health Organization, and the European Food Safety Authority, they all recommend limiting saturated fat to no more than 10% of your daily calories and replacing it with polyunsaturated fats like linoleic acid, which is found in seed oils. And here's another thing a lot of people don't realize. The National Academy of Medicine actually recommends that linoleic acid make up about 5 to 10% of your daily energy intake. So Americans are right in that range. We're getting about 8%, and that number has actually stayed pretty steady for the past 20 years. That consistency shows that linoleic acid continues to play a stable and appropriate role in our diet. And the dietary guidelines also recommend using liquid, non-tropical vegetable oils, including seed oils, as part of a healthy dietary pattern. So, oils like soybean oil aren't just healthful, they're also affordable, they're versatile, which makes them easy for people to use in everyday cooking. So it is true that seed oils are found in a lot of foods. This could be anything from salad dressings, pasta sauces, even, cookies. And yes, most restaurants do use seed oils for deep frying. And while that does give those foods a healthier fatty acid profile, that doesn't mean all those foods are automatically healthy. And this is where that context matters. Some of the fear around seed oils stems from the fact that their consumption increased quite significantly over the 20th century. But at the same time, we saw rising rates of chronic diseases like heart disease and obesity. But just because those things happened in parallel doesn't necessarily mean one caused the other. This is classic correlation versus causation, because during that same time period, we also saw a major rise in ultra processed food consumption, a drop in fruit and vegetable intake, increase in calorie consumption, and even lower activity levels. So it's probably more likely that those broader lifestyle and dietary shifts, and not seed oils alone, are what is driving that chronic disease risk. At the end of the day, this blame on seed oils oversimplifies a much more complex issue. And what really matters here is overall diet quality. Are we eating mostly nutrient dense, balanced meals? Are we getting enough fiber, fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains? Those are the questions that make the biggest difference for health, not whether or not you use some soybean oil to saute your veggies.
Such an excellent point right there. And you're so right that most Americans are not consuming whole foods, and it's not a diet rich in variety. I mean, we know there's a plethora of literature that shows that most Americans are only getting like 15 grams of fiber in a day. So I think we could shift our energy and our education towards increasing overall fiber intake, getting more of those fruits and veggies, and not really worrying about if your chicken or your fish or your veggies is sauteed in soybean oil. So I think that's a really important point. Okay, the final claim that I wanted to ask you, and this is where people draw a really hard line, is that I've heard that some people say that there is no such thing as a healthy seed oil. So I think I know what your opinion is on this, but what is your perspective and how can we address this with our patients?
Well, yeah, I hope I've made it clear, but I definitely want to reiterate my stance on this because I definitely think that's a bold statement and not an accurate one. The idea that there's no such thing as a healthy seed oil just doesn't reflect what the research shows. All this research we've already talked about. And seed oils can absolutely be part of a healthy diet. Not only are they rich in unsaturated fats, which are beneficial, but they provide essential fatty acids that our bodies can't make on their own. And their safety and health benefits are well supported by the evidence. So, what's also important to know is that not all seed oils are the same. They do have some different fatty acid profiles. We can take soybean oil, for example. It's actually one of the richest sources of polyunsaturated fats, specifically that linoleic acid that we've talked about. And because replacing saturated fat in the diet may help lower cholesterol and may help reduce the risk of heart attack, the FDA has actually granted soybean oil a qualified health claim. And this health claim states, and this is word for word, supportive but not conclusive scientific evidence suggests that eating about 1.5 tablespoons daily of soybean oil, which contains unsaturated fat, may reduce the risk of coronary heart disease. So that's amazing right there. You also have other oils, other seed oils like canola oil, which is actually higher in monounsaturated fat, specifically oleic acid, and oils containing at least 70% oleic acid may also be recognized for a qualified health claim. So when we step back and look at the full body of research, the message here is clear. Seed oils have been very unfairly villainized. They are rich in heart-healthy fats, and when they replace those saturated fats in the diet, they can help lower LDL cholesterol and support cardiovascular health. And that's exactly why those major health authorities, including the Dietary Guidelines for Americans and the American Heart Association, recommend using non-tropical vegetable oils like soybean, canola, and sunflower oils. And I just want to end with this. I think part of the problem is that we, just as humans, tend to want simple answers in nutrition. It's so much easier to blame a single ingredient than to look at the bigger picture here. But the truth is, those health outcomes aren't driven by just one food or ingredient. They're shaped by our overall dietary patterns. And ironically, a lot of people warning against seed oils are promoting high saturated fat alternatives, which is a shift that could actually increase the risk of heart disease. So again, rather than getting caught up in these hardline narratives, it's more helpful and honestly more accurate to focus on building balanced, nutrient-rich eating habits that support long-term health.
What a great place to end. And I think you're totally right. Seed oils are kind of lumped all together. And I think it was a fascinating thing for you to point out that each of them have different fatty acid profiles. So that's something that you can dig in with your patients too, is like if they're really concerned, maybe look at each one and talk about the different omega-3s and omega-6s that are in each one with your patient instead of just villainizing seed oils as a group or as a whole. So I think that was such a helpful conversation. Charlotte, thank you for breaking this down, because this was useful information and ways that we can explain it and kind of help our patients understand a lot of this misinformation online, because TikTok trends and social media, it's really, really tough to navigate this topic as a clinician. So thank you so much for sharing science, sanity, and some solid talking points. Now, if my listeners want to connect with you online, where can they find you?
Thank you so much, Colleen, for having me. It was such a pleasure to talk about one of my favorite topics. And you can find me at Nutrition Daily on Instagram and TikTok.
You have great content on your social media, but also don't forget to follow Soy Connection. They've got so many useful resources on there that you can use to educate yourself, but also that you can direct your patients to. So you can find them on Instagram and Facebook at Soy Connection. Now, don't forget to check the show notes for even more resources like patient handouts and a lot of the studies that we've referenced today. But if you do have any questions or concerns, please send them my way. Shoot me an email at colleen@examroomnutrition.com or find me on Instagram at examroomnutrition. I always love hearing from you guys, but until next time, let's continue to make our patients healthier, one exam room at a time.